A number of people have said how well produced this is, and I cannot tell a lie, although there are a lot of people who are responsible for this amazing series of events. The person who deserves the most credit from our team is Jeff Baum, and I hope you'll all recognize Jeff's great work. But for this very exciting panel, I'm thrilled to have my colleague, Cindy Kennard, who is the co-director of our retreats at Sunnylands, but many of you will remember Cindy as one of America's great correspondents. She was an award-winning correspondent for CBS, the first woman to be the bureau chief in Moscow for CBS. She was a correspondent in London and has had many, many other, during the Gulf War, she won the Columbia DuPont Award for the best coverage of the Gulf War, to lead a conversation on a subject that is both fascinating and dear to the Annenberg hearts. Please join me in welcoming Cindy Kennard.
Thanks, everybody, and I'm just absolutely thrilled to be here. And I want to start with a great story. And the Secretary of State said it this morning. I always feel like the Annenbergs are in the background here and taking care of all of us. Aww. So I know they were of me a couple of months ago because we decided that we had to find and get to know very well the Ambassador-in-Chief of Protocol. After all, Mrs. Annenberg had held that great title, and so we decided we were going to find the person who held that title in this day and age, and we were going to go see her. And so I went to the State Department just about Thanksgiving time, and I walked into the office with my pictures of the great Annenberg retreat at Sunnylands and our Declaration of Trust. And I found this spectacular woman, Ambassador Capricia Marshall, who is now our Ambassador-in-Chief of Protocol for the United States. And all of a sudden, I showed her the pictures, and her mind started working, and she said, when, why, what kind of meeting can we have there? What kind of meeting? So she was a person after our own hearts, and I think she's excited and enthused about Sunnylands, and so we're gonna hold her to that. She has had an extraordinary career. It's in the programs for today, so I'm not going to go through it bit by bit, but I will point out by saying she probably was the youngest social secretary ever to serve in the White House, and also had a great deal and a vital role in the Clinton White House with our current Secretary of State, Mrs. Clinton, and now, of course, holds this great title of Ambassador-in-Chief of Protocol. Ambassador Tuttle, so honored to have you here today. Again, to talk about the special relationship that the United States and the United Kingdom continues to this day. Winston Churchill called it a vital and essential relationship. We're looking forward to hearing from you. We know you've had an incredible career, again, in the bio, in the program with the Reagan White House, as well as certainly Bush 43, as we call him around here, in ambassadorship with the Court of St. James's. And so we're glad to have you here. Just a brief note on the Annenbergs. Both our panelists today actually have titles that the Annenbergs each had. We all know that Walter Annenberg was the ambassador to the Court of St. James from 1969 to 1974. And then, of course, Leonore Annenberg earned the title when she was appointed Chief of Protocol under President Reagan. We know from them, and we know from history, how vital these relationships are with our friends and our allies, and sometimes not our friends. And it falls to both of you in your positions to create these personal relationships that play such a role in foreign policy and international agreements. So I want to start with the Ambassador-in-Chief of Protocol to ask you, could you provide us with an example to illustrate how you, perhaps most recently, have used creative thinking to build relationships for the United States as we navigate through a very complicated global landscape right now?
Well, first, I would just like to say how incredibly privileged I am to be here today at Sunnylands. This incredible vision of Walter and Leonore Annenberg, my predecessor. What the work that you are doing, what you're planning on doing is just mind-boggling, as you say. I am reeling. I am thinking about ways in which we can bring together our global partners and continue the pursuit that they had started of greater peace, progress, and understanding around the world for many, many generations to come. I want to specifically also thank Mr. Cowan, thank you so very much for this invitation, and the Annenberg family for this invitation. And I am very honored to be on stage with the Honorable Mr. Tuttle. He is well known at the State Department, has a wonderful reputation, and many speak of you very fondly of the work that you had completed during your tenure in the UK. I believe that personal relationships really are at the core of diplomacy. There are many ways within our office that we attempt to create these personal relationships. Protocol, many people don't understand what protocol does. It's really not what Goldie Hawn did in the movie. And if by chance you may have seen me on CNN C-SPAN recently during the visit of President Calderon on the North Portico steps, where I happened to trip just a bit, but I got back up, and I got back up quickly. That really isn't about creating personal relationships, and we try to avoid those missteps, although moving forward is a big piece of what we do. I will give you a small aside that for my family, sitting in Cleveland, Ohio, there's Mexican-American, they were all watching this live on C-SPAN and waiting for the moment that I was going to extend my hand, as I am the person who first greets a visiting dignitary from another country, and they're all waiting for me to do that. And then, of course, I go down, I could just hear, ay caramba, from Cleveland everywhere. And I will also tell you that it was not the Secret Service or the military or anyone else, but the President of the United States, who was the one who reached out to help me and yelled to the press corps of 300 while the bulbs were flashing and all of the clicking was going on, said, do not take that photograph, which then, of course, they took many of. And I will tell you also that if you would like a really good laugh, because this is how you could create a wonderful relationship, you should go to Capricia Marshall Fall Remix, as my son has done on many occasions, where it has me going down and up and down and up to this wonderful music. It's also the gift that keeps on giving, because every time we go out to the North Portico, President Obama is just behind my head, and he says, we are getting near the steps. We are getting closer. Will she go down or won't she? And then, thankfully, Mrs. Obama's like, Barack, stop it. You're going to make her nervous. But again, I say that's really not about creating the best personal relationship. I have a really good example of this just recently, last week. We work very hard with the Diplomatic Corps through a variety of programs, and actually many set by my predecessors. We created this division called Diplomatic Partnerships Division. The wonderful Lucky Roosevelt, for those who know her, she is my mentor. And she told me, make sure that they interface with the top levels of our government, figure out ways, programs in which they can meet and get to know everyone in our government. And so we created State of the Administration. They will go in for talks and chats and with the President's Chief of Staff, because frankly, I know that there are some countries, their ambassador will never meet and speak to the President's Chief of Staff. But this is an opportunity. It's an open Q&A forum for them to engage. We also have events like Experience America, and we're going to be bringing the Diplomatic Corps to California in just a couple of weeks. We're very excited about that, for them to engage with us, to learn more about who we are as Americans, and for us to understand their interests and try to engage with the business community, non-government organizations, and the like. Well, we have been doing this for quite some time, and just recently, the ambassador of Italy was promoted to become, when the governments changed, when Mr. Berlusconi had to leave, he was promoted to foreign minister. But we had a wonderful relationship with this person throughout all levels in our government. And so now, as foreign minister, and he just returned with Prime Minister Monti last week, you could see how everyone was embracing him. Meetings were happening like this, and our government was truly engaging with his, and he really was the bridge to Prime Minister Monti, and Prime Minister Monti was really depending upon him because he knew us so well. And I think that is what is valued at really working on these relationships, these close personal relationships with the Diplomatic Corps. That's what I do, so that they can evolve and develop.
You know, I shouldn't tell you this, but I actually did some background on the ambassador, and one of the things that did come up was a picture of you falling down. But I didn't use it today.
It's a good one. You should.
So let's keep this at a higher level now, Ambassador Tuttle. Because I know that you were in the United Kingdom, shall I say, at probably one of the most challenging times in modern history for that relationship. There were two unpopular wars underway in Iraq and Afghanistan. The U.S. reputation around the world a bit wobbly at the time. And here you are, the United States representative, trying to keep this friendship intact, hold it together while people are in the streets and so forth. What kind of creative thinking did you employ at that time?
First, I was absolutely scared out of my mind.
Yeah.
And I would like to say that I've tripped up a lot of my life, but never at the level of Capricia. And before I answer that, I just would like to say I was sitting this morning, you know, we're talking so much about the Annenbergs and Sunnylands, and really, they created, which helped us a lot, and I will answer your question, they created a Sunnylands in London. As I think most of you know, they went to London in 1969 when he was confirmed as ambassador. And one of the first things they did was to hire a very famous Los Angeles decorator, William Haynes, and they redid Winfield House. Many of you have been there. If for those of you who haven't, go soon. Not only did they spend an absolute fortune on redecorating Winfield House, they endowed the house so that it's the first floor, which is the public spaces, are still the same as they were in 1970 when the project was finished. Of course, for the opening dinner that they had, Queen Elizabeth came, and that just made Winfield House the place to go to in London. And really, since then, we were talking about personal diplomacy. That's where the diplomacy is carried out. There's some at the embassy, but really at Winfield House. The first meeting between the IRA and the Protestants took place at Winfield House. When I was ambassador, Condi Rice came 6 or 7 times. She always wanted to meet with the foreign secretary at Winfield House. Oh, just as an aside, I was talking one day to one of the cooks who'd been there a long time when this IRA meeting took place, and I said, what was it like? He said, it was so tense, so exciting. He said, but I like the IRA people better. President Bush, when he came to London, met with David Cameron at Winfield House. It's really, it's fantastic. Just to quickly now to answer your question, there was, after 9/11, a tremendous emphasis on public diplomacy. And the president, when he called me and asked me to do this job, said he really wanted me to be a public diplomat. And I've since thought about that and thought maybe he just wanted me to stay out of the way with his communication with Tony Blair and then Gordon Brown. But anyway, when we did get there, Cindy is right. The Iraq War especially was unpopular. There was issues of Guantanamo. And so we decided to take it on, Maria and I, my wife sitting here, really through intensive public diplomacy. We took about 60 trips throughout the United Kingdom in our 3.5 years there. And when we we went to all the major population centers. One of the interesting things about that, though, to show you again about the Annenbergs, I'll bet you in 50% of the places that we went, there was a picture of the Annenbergs who'd been there, or someone would come up and say, I remember when Ambassador Annenberg and Mrs. Annenberg came and they gave us a larger donation with their hand out. And I'd have to remind them that I was just a humble automobile dealer and not... But so we did that. And when we'd go to these towns, we'd meet with the major political leaders, the MP or the mayor. We would meet I would usually give a speech to business leaders. Then in the afternoons, there'd be a major university I would go and do speak shortly and really get my brains beat out in the Q&A session. And in the center of the country, there's a pretty heavy Muslim population, and we really tried to go to as many mosques as we could. So that was one of our efforts in public diplomacy. In addition to that, we did about, I think between 200 and 250 radio and TV appearances throughout the country. And I think in a small way it might have made a little difference.
I wanted the ambassador to share, since we're on the topic of the UK and the US, most recently we had a state dinner in London for the current President of the United States, and I know you played an enormous role. And actually part of your job is making sure that those visits are smooth. They go smoothly, they go properly. And I know that part of it is gifting, actually, thinking about exactly what the gift is. And I understand there's quite a story about you in the United Kingdom and a gift.
Yes. Well, part of again, within our office, ways in which we seek out to assist with diplomacy is through the sort of creating the atmosphere, the personal atmosphere, and that can happen in a variety of ways. It might be wearing, I would wear a particular color in honor of a particular country that we know would be received well, or I might add to a centerpiece, piece of artwork that we know might be influenced by their culture. But gifting really is one way in which we can say, we understand your interests, and we showcase the pride in our own art and culture. Gifts had been a bit of an issue early on in the administration, particularly with the UK. I wasn't there yet. And
very good.
When we traveled over, it really was it was the center focus of this visit. And when I arrived in the UK, I realized I had reached the mecca of protocol. I mean, it was just here in Buckingham Palace, and you could feel it. But what I didn't know was that the chief of protocol was Her Majesty herself. She conducted everything. She kept everything on time. She watched that. She watches that watch, and she carries the bag. I don't know what's in the bag, but don't even ask to touch the bag. They will say, "Do not touch the bag." And so I stayed far away from the bag. But as part of the whole state visit, there are many complicated movements, many particular events that take place, and all very much on time. Her Majesty has both suites, that's delegations, up to this room for a luncheon in honor of the visiting dignitary, our president. And so while they were in the luncheon, these enormous doors slide closed, and then everyone prepares the gifts, and they're on these very, very long tables just outside of the luncheon room. And they are preparing theirs, and we are supposed to be preparing ours. And so I am, hurriedly making things look nice, and then all of a sudden the doors open up, and Her Majesty is leading President Obama and Mrs. Obama out, and she first presents her gifts to the president. They're very nice, lovely, beautiful pin, and this wonderful book. And then it is our turn, and I'm standing next to the president, and I'm feeling a little tense, just a little. And we had presented her gift, and it was an album, a leather album with original memorabilia that we had collected. Everyone, I'm sure, is aware of the King's Speech and her relationship. She has this wonderful relationship with her father. And so we went around and we collected memorabilia from his last visit to the United States. We found original tickets and menus and invitations and all that. And she was so touched, and she was really, really pleased. And then we moved on to the next gift, to Prince Philip. And she looked at it and said, okay, I'm going to be unprotocol for just a moment, because the story is better if I have a bit of a British accent. So she looks over and she says, Philip, come here. Come and see what they've got your ponies. Now, we had learned that that he enjoyed pony carriage racing. And so he walked over and he looked at them, and they're bits and shanks that we had created, my artisan in Ohio and Colorado, that had soldered on the ends the presidential seal. And so she was really excited by this and looking at this. And he walks over and he looks at them and he starts to say, well, these are quite nice, these are quite nice. And then he lifts one up and he says, well, these will break my pony's jaws. Holy cow. And my God. I am suddenly horrified. I look at the president and he's looking at me like, oh no. And so this wonderful queen, she calls over, she says, she gets this man, I don't know who he is, the exchequer of the horses or something like that. He's like 6'7", he's really tall. So he comes over and he looks and she says, what do you think of these bits and shanks? And he picks them up, he goes, oh, fine quality, excellent qualities, these will do fine. She goes, I told you, Philip. And so I was like, phew, we moved on, and then very, very relieved. And then she looks over and she says, well, but who are the bushes for? And I looked over wondering, what bushes? And we had created for Prince Charles a box made out of magnolia wood from a tree that had fallen during a storm on the south grounds of the White House. The magnolia tree, the Jackson magnolia. I'm sure many people are aware of the Jackson magnolia. So we took the wood and we brought it to a wood carver, and he created this box. And in the box, then, we went around and we collected from Mount Vernon and Monticello and from the south grounds of the White House, saplings. And we brought those because he's into the environment. This is a big issue of his. And then some White House honey, because the Obamas have beehives on the south grounds. And he was really touched. He said, oh, this is wonderful. Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much. Oh, White House honey. He says, yes. He goes, well, I have honey. He says, oh, bring my honey. I'd like my honey. Well, then Prince Philip comes over again. He says, well, I have honey. There's my beehives. Bring my honey. And there was like a honey off suddenly going on, you know? And it was really wonderful. But that I kid you not, it was not 5 minutes later that on the television, news reports were, you know, basically Americans did well, you know, the gifts are well received by Her Majesty. And it is a big piece of what we do, you know, what does that symbolize and how they're conveyed and then how they are received. So at the end of that, it was a big, you know, brush of the brow. We did okay.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Ambassador Tuttle and Ambassador Marshall, you know, there are some arcane rules in some places, old traditions, old customs. Tell us about a time when you may have been in a predicament where you've actually ended up frustrated and unable to accommodate building that relationship because of the tradition or because of the rules. Britain has a lot of rules, and you were probably in the position of being one of the ambassadors that might have had the most.
Anyone who knows me well knows that I probably don't know anything about protocol, so I'm sure I made huge mistakes, but it must be much better to tell you about one of my wife's mistakes. One of the great, I think Walter Annenberg said it was one of the greatest days of his life, and it is unbelievably exciting. When you present your credentials to Her Majesty, the coach comes to the embassy, and it was really very, very exciting. And I had on my top hat, and Maria had on a beautiful dress that she had made, and we get in the coach and go off to Buckingham Palace. And then you go into this sort of holding room, which is almost as big as this room, and the ceiling must be 30 or 35 feet. And Maria goes off with somebody, and I go off with someone, and my staff goes off with someone. And so I go in first, and it's just like if you all saw the Henry Adams, it's the same thing. The door opens, you bow, you walk in through the door, you bow again, and then you go up and start chatting with Her Majesty. And you chat for a few minutes, and as Capricia says, she's very good on time. After 5 or 10 minutes, she says, well, I'd like to meet your staff, and you bring them in. And then in comes Maria. She then finally to meet my wife, and I saw, and most of you know Maria, but she is the most perfect person. But I could see that she was missing one of her gloves. And so she comes up to Her Majesty, and just to show you, though, how wonderful Her Majesty is and how natural, Maria starts to talk with her, and she says, you know, Your Majesty, I don't know what happened, but on my way down here, I lost a glove. And they both started laughing, and it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And she always, the entire royal family, at least with our experience, went out of their way to make you feel so comfortable. And in 2007, if you all remember, she visited the United States and went to Williamsburg, but she started off at Richmond. And I just remember how she worked the crowd and these little tiny kids who, she talked to them and they handed her flowers, and she really went out of her way every place she went to make people feel comfortable. And that's why I think that the royal family is such a great asset to the United Kingdom. Before that visit occurred, the palace called up the embassy and they said, we'd like to have a cocktail party for the prominent reception for the prominent Americans who live in the United Kingdom. So please give us a list, which we did. And I must say, they came through the door, and of course, the first people to greet them, first people at Buckingham Palace were Maria and I. But after that, they talked to everybody in the room. There must have been, what do you think, Maria, 300 or 400 Americans who were there. They went out of their way to shake their hand with every single American and really have a good conversation. It was very impressive. They are a great asset to the United Kingdom and great friends of America.
Secretary Shultz tells tremendous stories about Sunnylands and being there with President Reagan and helping President Reagan through the Cold War period, and they'd speak about things on the golf course and so forth, and ways to build trust in relationships. Both of you have had roles where you've had to build that trust in relationships. Can you Can you tell us, as the whole world pivots in the other direction from the UK and from Europe toward Asia, these are new relationships. I know you're working on one this week, Ambassador Marshall, so maybe you'd want to start. We have the Chinese Vice President, Xi, arriving in the country next week. You're in the midst of that, and by the way, she shoehorned this into her schedule because I know how busy you are. Let's talk about building trust in that relationship, for example.
It's, Secretary Schultz would know this better than anyone, an interesting and complex relationship. And so detail is very, very important. Part of what we do in the Office of Protocol is we sort of create the framework for diplomacy, that when a visiting delegation comes to the United States, we make sure that they're greeted, we make sure that all the details that need to go in place for that visit are in place, and that we've communicated that appropriately with our counterparts. And it oftentimes, as those who've worked at state know, it goes back and forth quite a bit. It's a bit of a ping pong match sometimes, and that's not really a pun on the Chinese relationship. But, and with this upcoming visit, it's very important because he is expected to be the next president of China. And so we're investing a great deal of our time in it. And so looking at where those photographs take place, very specifically when and how do we make introductions, and what will then be conveyed through the media in the following days. And so every single moment is being looked at with a very close eye.
So what are the Chinese asking us for? What are they coming out and can you give us diplomatic secrets here?
That.
What are they saying? Can you tell us anything?
Well, I'm not sure. It would be inappropriate to get into specifics on this, but generally speaking, with a visit at this level, this is what we call a working visit, but a very high-level working visit because he'll be spending considerable time with the Vice President and with the President and the Secretary of State. He will be traveling here to California, and there's many events that will be taking place here as well. But with all of those types of visits and with the structure, like I said, we are looking for specific moments and making sure that those moments happen that can convey the appropriate message. And we have really been collaborating and working very well. Over time, again, going back to creating these personal relationships, when I was Social Secretary in the Clinton administration, the current ambassador of China was the chief of protocol. And so the two of us knew each other very well during that time. And now he is ambassador of China to the United States, and I'm in the Office of Protocol. So we talk to one another constantly through these visits. And I have become very close to the current chief of protocol. And we can have very frank conversations, like, you don't want to do that, and let me tell you why this will happen. Or they very much impressing upon us something that they would like to have happen. And we work that all through so that we can come to a collaborative, good decision in the end.
And how much of a role will you actually play in the visit this week? I mean, will you travel with him? Will you greet him when he arrives at the White House? Can you share with us where you will be this week?
I will return immediately back to Washington, D.C. to engage in final preparations tomorrow. And then on Monday, I will greet him. I will be there to greet the delegation when he arrives. And then Tuesday, that's all of our official meetings, and then he will go to Iowa, and I am not going to Iowa. And I'm only not going because that is a personal trip for him. He had spent considerable time there in his youth in Iowa, and so he really wanted to go and meet and greet with friends that he had spent time with then. And then I will be here in California to greet him upon his arrival, along with many other dignitaries, I believe. And and then we will have all of the events that will occur on Thursday and Friday. It's a very ambitious schedule.
It sounds that way.
Cindy, I think personal diplomacy is so important when you think of President Bush and Prime Minister Blair and President Clinton, Prime Minister Blair. And then, of course, I think I was lucky enough to work for the master, which was Ronald Reagan, for 6 years. When you think of him greeting Gorbachev in Geneva, the first meeting, walking out in just a suit, and it was, I'm sure George was colder than hell, and I just think it started that personal relationship. And I might just tell you one story. When Gorbachev came to the United States, it was in December, I believe, of '87, and I played a lot of tennis. Howard Baker said I was always on the tennis court, but it happened to be a warm day, and I was out on the tennis court. And in the middle of the match, 4 of the biggest bruisers you have ever seen in your life walked onto the court. I'd never seen guys so big. Well, we knew something was happening, so my partner and I ran over to the fence, and there was the president and Gorbachev, were just like this, walking hand in hand in the South Lawn. And it was just so clear that they had developed this personal relationship that was so intense. And it was funny because the interpreter was shorter than both of them, was sort of scurrying along behind, trying to keep up. But I think that the personal relationships not only led to some of the great achievements of the Reagan administration, but it also, I think, at times helps smooth over the rough spots in relationships. When you think about even President Kennedy and Khrushchev, the letter exchanges they had during the Cuban Missile Crisis and how important those were. So I think personal relationships are just vital, and we're so lucky to have people like Capricia who are helping facilitate that as you go along.
I'm just going to wrap up because we're running out of time here. We want to keep everybody on schedule, but just a final question. When it comes to international diplomacy and the times we're living in, we're sitting at the edge of the Pacific Rim right now in the great state of California. What kind of a role do you see someplace like Sunnylands playing? What kind of opportunities can it provide?
I think it goes back to what we've been talking about, that people can come here and be in a quiet place, private, and sit and talk and really get to know each other. Not only the leaders, but I'm a big believer it's just as important for the foreign secretaries and their staffs. I know that, again, to talk about President Reagan, who was a real delegator, if he wouldn't have never signed some of the agreements had he not had the approval of, or the approval of George Shultz and the people under him. So when you have a place like Sunnylands where the staffs can meet and integrate, they really get to know each other. And that's why I think this is going to be a great place as the world moves in this direction, that we have a place like this. And again, thanks to the generosity of 2 extraordinary people, Lee and Walter Annenberg.
I think an environment can have the environment in which diplomacy takes place can really have a tremendous impact on the success of it. As an example, and I'm, as I said, very excited about Sunnylands. As an example, Secretary Clinton, when she first arrived to the State Department, realized that we have the 8th floor of the State Department, the diplomatic reception rooms, and they're really extraordinary. And that's where we bring chiefs of state, heads of government, foreign ministers, heads of delegation to engage in those bilateral conversations that sometimes are very difficult to have. And you need to go to somewhere, to a place where they feel respected, where they feel as though they can engage. And so she had learned throughout that there wasn't an endowment for these rooms, and that they were basically sort of fixing them up along the way every year. And through the help of Charlotte Shultz, Secretary Shultz, Ambassador Bagley, and so many others, there's now a $20 million endowment for those rooms. It is important where you bring these leaders. Sure. It's important the environment that they are within, and it can change the conversation dramatically. And I think, as Ambassador Tuttle noted, that Sunnylands is going to be a perfect place in which to bring them to engage in that type of conversation, and particularly when issues are at a level that they need to have that personal interaction, something that is like this, comfortable, elegant, and historic.
Thanks very much to both of you. I had the great pleasure of being able to talk to Secretary Shultz and former Secretary Colin Powell about what actually did occur in history in that house. And I know I speak for the president of the Trust, Jeff Cowan, in saying we really are thrilled. We're looking forward to continuing what the Annenbergs have laid the groundwork for, and we hope you'll both be engaged with us on that journey.
Absolutely.
So thanks very much. And thanks.